Hello and welcome back to Questions from Quarantine. We recently touched on hurricane season in a recent episode, but we'd like to come back to it because as we're seeing in Texas and Hawaii, hurricane season is upon us and the COVID issues are not going away. I'd like to go to Juliette to see how things are being handled on the ground and what she expects to see as summer continues, particularly for places like Florida, which are quite vulnerable both from a COVID and a hurricane perspective.
Yeah.
Juliette?
No, it's something we've been thinking about in the disaster management field since March, since the National Weather Service predicted a higher than usual hurricane season, and they were right. The statistic I heard in a briefing this weekend is that we are at the named, they name a hurricane or a tropical storm, they give it a name when it reaches a certain capacity. We are at the name in the alphabet that in terms of the letter that we are normally in mid-September, and it's late July. So we've got all of August. So we anticipate a lot, and there's been a lot of good planning. That's the good news. The bad news is people are cranky and exhausted in terms of emergency managers. And the other bad mood is, our pandemic response has not been ideal. So there's three variables that we have put into place. And it's fascinating how this is going to work. So normal hurricane response, if you live in Louisiana or Texas, like you sort of know this at this stage. So the first is going to be as between sheltering and staying at home, there's going to be a preference for staying at home. People are at home generally, they have stuff at home, and that you basically are kind of rolling the dice. If you do choose as an entity to call for an evacuation, call it early. People are used to being home. They've been told to stay at home. They've been told being on the road is not safe. I mean, it's hard enough to get people to evacuate. You're just going to have a different psychology of the time. The third is that shelters have to adapt to if shelters are open to a hurricane. So the Red Cross, which tends to run shelters in a hurricane, is looking at ways to dedensify, test people for COVID before they come in, use motels and hotels, and just basically try, normal shelter, because they're supposed to be short term, is 300 people on cots until they can figure out where they're going. So we tend to think of shelters as like 3 months. No. The average stay in a shelter is 36 hours, but 36 hours is long enough to catch COVID. So that's how they're thinking about it. But as I said, no one's done this before. The planning is there, but it's really in the execution, which we're seeing, is challenging for institutions and cities and counties and states.
Yeah. So the only thing I would add there that I think is kind of an interesting dynamic that's coming up is, we all of a sudden have really embraced this testing that's on point of use testing. That means, you do it yourself, and like a pregnancy test, you get it back. And there are, very cheap. It's not a new technology. These are antigen tests. They are not necessarily as accurate. They're very cheap. And funny story from Massachusetts, one of the folks we have been working with was try these out on work site for his workers. And he was like, oh, this worked really well. I got these cheap tests. I'm going to, go and order 600 more. And he went to order them. And it's like, no, you're not, because all of a sudden everybody's like, wow, this point of use testing is really critical. But I do think, so I think it was actually good. I think the feds have stepped in to try to regulate who has access to that, which I think is really important. Juliette, your point about testing people before they go into shelter. That's a perfect example of where you'd really want to be able to deploy that capability. And I think thinking about testing as a capability, just, like we do any other national security asset, is the way that I think people's mind is starting to change about that particular tool.
Yeah, I think that's right. But look, just to add on to this, we're a big nation and we have many, many threats. We are not in the place that we should be when dealing with hurricane season. Most of the planning had assumed that there would be a level of stability in most states. And one of the things that makes me nervous is that it's the Gulf states who are also experiencing the greatest harm. Texas, Georgia, my God, Georgia. We don't hear much about South Carolina, but it's not in great shape, that are often in harm's way in terms of a hurricane. So.
Well, thank you both. Those of you in vulnerable states, we are thinking of you. Questions from Quarantine is going to be taking a little bit of a vacation over the next couple of weeks. Please keep an eye out. Juliette's on vacation for a month and a half, but please keep an eye out. We'll have some new content for you, but new videos coming within the next month. Thank you so much.